Hi, I'm Naomi Shihab, and this is Time to Connect.
Naomi Shihab, thank you so much for taking the time to connect. It really is an honor.
Thank you so much. I'm impressed that you've had so many guests on your program, John. That's really impressive.
It's crazy, the idea started during COVID. I'm a retired professor, and for many years, my when I would have my annual performance review, my dean would tell me, "You got to get on board with this online learning. That's the future." And I would always say, "Hell no." I cherish the classroom too much. But then when COVID happened, I had to learn to do this.
Right. We
And
didn't have a
and
choice. Right.
right. And what I
Yeah.
discovered is it's not so bad. It's actually pretty cool. And
You know, it is. It gives us all kinds of opportunities that we might not have had otherwise. Uh, I hear you because I was named Young People's Poet Laureate right before the COVID lockdown started. Well, actually, it started a few months after I had begun my activities, and so everything had to switch online. And at first, I was so sad because I was thinking of all these great projects we were going to have to kind of cancel or reinvent, and it turned out okay. It turned out good.
yeah,
Yeah.
good. And you are in San Antonio?
I am in old downtown San Antonio, nestled between the river and the San Pedro Creek. So we have two beautiful walkways along water in San Antonio, and we feel lucky that we're right between them.
Nice.
Half
And
a
you
block and one block. Yeah.
and that's you were born, I think, in St. Louis, is that
St.
right?
Louis, yes.
Yeah, and you've lived a few different places, but you've been in San Antonio for a long
The
time. Yeah.
longest. Yes. I've been here since I was the last 2 years of high school. My parents moved our family here. And for a while, I was the only person in my family who stayed here. Uh, I went to college here, Trinity University, and then my parents moved away, my brother moved away. But then I met my husband here, and he had not grown up here, but he loved it here. And so we stayed here. And then my mother moved back here for the last 5 years of her life, and that was a lot of fun.
Nice. What do you like most about living in San Antonio?
Oh, I like everything about San Antonio. It's a sweet city that feels like a town. I realize we have all these far-flung suburbs. My beautiful grandson lives in one, but I, I know many neighborhoods in this city because I worked for so many different schools locally as a visiting writer in the schools, writer in residence, visiting poet, whatever they called it. And so I know the neighborhoods of this town, I think, better than a lot of people do. And they're all fascinating. They're all interesting in some way and
Yeah.
so different, so various. I love the oldness of San Antonio. I love that people are outside a lot. My husband and I are two of the few people we know who really like summer, even though it's very hot here and getting
Yes, it
hotter all
is.
the time, getting
Yes.
hotter all the time. But we live in a 120-year-old house, and we have, as the years went by, improved the air conditioning in our house. So the house is cool even when outdoors is very hot. We just love our friends, love the arts community here, love all the little funky aspects, the little restaurants, the all the stories, the libraries, everything. We like we're really
Beautiful.
fans of San Antonio.
Fantastic. Naomi, I usually start these things by asking my guests to give a potted biography, but I don't think we need to do that with you. If people don't know who you are, I don't know where they've been. And of course,
Well, they don't need to know it anyway.
uh,
It's not that
Goo- you,
wild.
you're, they can find out about you on Google, and I will definitely put links in the show notes so people can check you out and to see all the wonderful things that you have done and are doing. One of the things we want to do today is we want to talk about this wonderful new book that you
Thank you.
edited. But
Yes.
before we do, I have some other things, if you don't mind. Um, would you mind reading a couple of poems of
No,
yours?
I would love it. I would
And
love
let's start with famous.
Okay, and the way that poem came into existence was when I started working in schools. I was 22 years old, and I looked extremely young for a 22-year-old. And the kids used to come in the library looking skeptical, like, who is this person we're going to hear? And frequently they would ask me, ma'am, who are you? Are you famous? They would say that before I'd even said one word of hello. And I realized quickly that I really didn't like that word. What is famous? And I would say, everything is famous if you notice it. You know, you're famous to him, right? You're all famous to your family, to your neighbors. What does that word mean to you? And so, you know, poets, we talk about words. And then I thought, well, I'll just write a poem that I can read them when they ask me that question. So that was how this poem, Famous, was written. It later turned into a children's picture book all by itself. It was the idea of the artist Lisa DeSimone, and that came out a few years ago. So this is Famous. The river is famous to the fish. The loud voice is famous to silence, which knew it would inherit the earth before anybody said so. The cat sleeping on the fence is famous to the birds watching him from the birdhouse. The tear is famous briefly to the cheek. The idea you carry close to your bosom is famous to your bosom. The boot is famous to the earth, more famous than the dress shoe, which is famous only to floors. The bent photograph is famous to the one who carries it, not at all famous to the one who is pictured. I want to be famous to shuffling men who smile while crossing streets, sticky children in grocery lines, famous as the one who smiled back. I want to be famous in the way a pulley is famous, or a buttonhole, not because it did anything spectacular, but because it never forgot what it could do. So kids would write parallels of that poem. Their teachers would ask them to after they heard it, and they wrote great ones, better ones than that. Definitely my favorite line in it was about the bent photograph, famous to the one who carries it and not famous to the one who's in the picture. Because you know how kids tack up pictures on their walls.
Sure.
So I loved that. I like poems that could be models or little strategies for kids to use too if they wanted to write their own.
Nice. What do you suppose? What is it about fame? It seems so many people want to be famous, and almost like it doesn't matter what they're famous for.
I know.
They somehow have this notion that fame in and of itself is going to make them happy somehow. And of course, we know
Right.
from studies on happiness, Dan Gilbert and other people, studies on happiness, people are just terrible at predicting what's going to make them happy. And this is a great example of it. People get famous and they really don't like that fame. What do you suppose that is that makes people want to be famous?
It's a peculiar desire. I think it's connected to this fantasy of happiness, that if you're well known, if a lot of people acknowledge your existence, that you'll then be happy. Um, I I don't know. I and this was that poem was written pre-internet. I mean, there was no internet, no email, no Instagram fame at the time that poem was written. It's interesting to look back on things too, because I think that that appetite for fame may only have grown. You know, when I hear these days people described as an influencer, I'm not even sure what that means. Like, who do they want to influence?
Yeah,
What are they trying to influence us to do or to buy or to
yeah,
be? It's a concept. That one is curious to me. Like, what is an influencer?
yeah.
Um, yeah, and when does it get determined if someone is one?
Uh-huh.
Because that is not a word that I had ever heard at the time I wrote the famous poem. Uh, I don't know.
Though you are an influencer, of course.
Well, I've tried to be an encourager, John. An
Okay.
encourager is someone, who really promotes, you can do it. I'm a
Yeah.
writer. I'm just a humble person in a messy little room. You can do it. We're all thinkers. We all have words and memories and worries and hopes. And if I can write, you can write. So I've always felt like encouraging was my real task. That was my goal.
Beautiful. You seems to me you've got that sweet spot of fame. I mean, you've been called a cultural icon. You're well known internationally in some circles, and yet I bet you can walk down the street in San Antonio or pretty much any other city in the world and not be harassed by people.
No, I'm not harassed. People are friendly and they just say, hey,
Yeah,
how are you?
yeah.
And my grandson teases me because he says wherever we go, someone greets me by name. And recently we were going in a shop, a curious little shop in his neighborhood. It was kind of a resell it shop founded by teachers. And, I didn't know what they sold there. I just had seen it and it has a very appealing front. And he said to me when we got out of the car, I bet they're going to know you here. And I said, well, how could they know me? I've never even been here. I don't even know what they sell. And we walked in and like four people called my name. And he said,
Nice.
see. And then it
Told
hit
you.
me, they're teachers. I've worked in all the schools, so I know teachers.
Yeah.
So I try to say that to him, it's not like that. It's just, you live a long enough time, people will know you or they'll remember you or recognize you. I think for me, the most pleasurable aspect of being called out identity wise in San Antonio has been people who say, oh, you came to my class when I was in fourth grade or fifth grade. And that day we stood up and read our poems. That was the happiest day of elementary school that I remember. And when I hear that, I just want to start crying because I think I don't want that to be your happiest day. I just want it to be a nice memory for you. But, we should be doing that all the time, sharing our voices. And I never felt that was done enough. Some schools emphasize it more than others, but I always felt our treasure here is our kids. Their beautiful, incredible powers of metaphor, their possibilities of imaginative writing, their voices. Why aren't we having a kid read every day to us? Their own writing. Why aren't we doing this? So that's what I try to promote always.
Yeah. How do you how do you feel when someone calls you and you've been called a powerful voice for Arab Americans?
Well, I'm happy. I love Arab Americans and I love Arabs, and I'm very proud to be half Arab. So anything I can do, I would do it. I'm a strong pro justice, pro peace person all my life, as was my fully Arab father. And I feel that since he died, I had kind of a double legacy. I felt like I wanted to carry on his legacy of speaking out and um, and my own that I was kind of trying to create with poetry as our vehicle. He was a journalist, so he was also a word person, and um, yeah, no, I'm proud of that. I'm very proud. I feel like a failure, obviously, because there's so much negativity in the world these days and lack of peace of so many kinds. Just today, I was writing to one of my oldest Texas friends about um, her feelings in this particular political moment that she feels like she's losing a lot of her friends
Yeah.
because of her political beliefs. And I said, I want to express my sadness. I don't want you to lose any friends. And it's a weird time in the world where um, people can lose contact with members of their families, with their longtime friends, with other people in the community who might be depicting you in a certain way. A lot of stereotyping going on. So even if we're not thinking international relations, John, I think we all have a task to do. That how do we keep our humanity alive? connecting to others, even if we don't share like our preferences in politics or local politics, national politics, whatever. Um, I'm extremely um, traumatized by the tragedies in Gaza. I'm, of course, very sad and horrified by what Hamas did to Israelis, but I do understand some of the frustration that Palestinian people have been living with for going on 80 years. So it's not as if horrible acts of violence came out of a vacuum and everybody had been pure and living in justice before that. No, no, no. This has been going on for a really long time. My father was a refugee in 1948. So, I think it's horrible to see so many innocent people dying, whether they're in Israel or in Gaza. They don't deserve to die. Children don't ever deserve to die. Children haven't committed any of these crimes. So that has traumatized me a lot. And if there's any way I can speak up twice as much for the humanity of Arab kids, um, I would want to do that.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Speaking of humanity, one thing before we get to this beautiful new book, one other thing I wanted to ask you about is William Stafford, because
Yes.
I know he's been an important person to you, and I love the man's poetry. I had the opportunity to meet him and see him read. I think
Oh, wonderful.
I think it was in the 70s in my undergraduate program, but it may have been in the 80s in my graduate program. But I just was so impressed
Yeah.
with his humanity, with
Oh,
just what a
the
beautiful
best.
man he was. I just wanted to ask you about, I've heard that you had I've even heard that he was your mentor. Is that, would we consider
Yes,
that
I would
poetry?
call him my number one mentor.
Okay.
Uh, excuse me. I was so lucky to encounter his work as a 17-year-old. My parents moved to Texas, and in those days, high school students had big, heavy textbooks that we carried around with us everywhere. And there was a slim section of modern poets at the back of that book. And when I was a junior, I that's when I came to Texas. I turned, I looked ahead, who was in there, and I'd been reading poets all my life already since I was a kid, little kid, and I felt that William Stafford's poems, they just embraced me in a way. They took me in that I felt like this is the voice I've been looking for. This is instantly my favorite poet. I've got to go find out more about him. So again, pre-internet days, I go to the school library and they actually had uh, three William Stafford full volumes. I was ecstatic. I checked them all out. I took them home. I started reading his poems, and then going to the public library to get other books of his I could find. And I just felt so completely excited and comforted at the same time by his work. He had a humanity, a sense of attention to place and detail and humble detail that appealed to me so much uh, that I just started doing outreach. In those days, we would all go to the library, and by the time I got into college, I would spend hours and hours in the research library sections and literary magazine sections, and I was constantly studying and finding more and more about William Stafford. When I was about 28 or so, or 27, I had a chance to meet him, and it was very exciting. It was the first real literary festival I had ever attended. It was at Notre Dame University in Indiana, and he was there. He was just as wonderful in person as his poems were. And little did I know at that first meeting that I would go on to know him for the rest of his life and his whole family. They became some of our dear friends. His wife, Dorothy, all four of his children, three of whom survived till now, and I'm friends with all of them. Kim Stafford, by the way, will be coming to the Round Top Poetry Festival in Texas this year in April. I urge you to come. I invite you. It's a fantastic poetry festival that's been going on about 20 some years now. And Kim will be one of the headliners there. Uh, and Kim Stafford also is a mentor to me and to so many other people, because I would say the entire Stafford family embodied and represented kind of a creative spirit that is, as William Stafford would have said, it's portable. You can use it, carry it around, and use it in your own life, whatever way it serves you. And I loved his idea that poems were here to serve us. Writing poems and reading poems helped us understand the worlds we were in and helped us understand our own minds better. Certainly, I've found that true. And when I started out working in the schools so young, I really banked on William Stafford's poems to help me, to be there with me all the time. I would share his poems everywhere. I mean, I used to say to teachers, I don't think I've ever entered a classroom and not mentioned the name William Stafford or read some of his lines, some of his poems, because they were always helpful. They always were interesting in different ways. And they conveyed important lessons or learnings about what language can give us that we all need. So since he died, nonetheless, I have continued turning to his words. He did write about 3 or 4 collections of essays about writing, which I strongly recommend to your listeners. And the first one was called Writing the Australian Crawl, Views on the Writer's Vocation. The second one was called You Must Revise Your Life. I love that title. William Stafford was an early morning writer, which I have also been all my life. Even before I started reading his poems, I was a person who would get up like at 4 or 5 in the morning, even when I was a teenager, to do some writing of my own. And his ideas about, seizing this time, claiming a little time for yourself, your own writing every day, that grew into something right now that's going on and will continue going on for another year, called the Stafford Challenge. And a guy in Oregon named Brian Rohr has organized the Stafford Challenge. Anyone can join it. You can be part of Facebook groups that do the Stafford Challenge. These are people who are writing every day and sharing their work and getting together like once a month online on Zoom, because they're all over the world, to share some of their work. And I think it's been a very, very productive time for people who were not in the habit of writing daily. So if anybody out there is looking to join something like the Stafford Challenge, it's open to you. Just Google it and find it and sign up.
Fantastic, and yet another benefit of this new ability to
Yeah.
connect online. Would you mind reading from this wonderful volume your poem that you
Yes.
dedicated to William Stafford, Bill's Beans?
Also in this volume, which is Everything Comes Next,
Okay,
collected in 2. But it is a favorite poem of mine, so I collected it in this book.
beautiful.
I did go up to Oregon after William Stafford's very sudden death. I was invited by his family to come and just be there for some days and help out with all that happens after someone dies very suddenly. And that was the time at which this poem happened, and I wrote it afterwards. Bill's Beans, for William Stafford. Under the leaves, they're long and curling. I pull a perfect question mark and 2 lean twins, feeling the magnetic snap of stem, the ripened weight. At the end of a day, the earth smells thirsty. He left his brown hat, his shovel, and his pen. I don't know how deep bean roots go. We could experiment. He left the sky over Oregon, the fluent trees. He gave us our lives that were hiding under our feet, saying, you know what to do. So we'll take these beans back into the house and steam them. We'll eat them one by one with our fingers, the clean click and freshness. We'll thank him forever for our breath and the brevity of being. It was such an overwhelming and touching time, being asked to do these little chores to help out the family, like, oh, somebody better go check the garden, because things will be ripe, and he wouldn't like us to leave them, just hanging on the vine. And then, and then to be eating his beans that he had planted with his family around his table, their table, after his death. It was so profound and touching.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you so much. I think, John, you might be the first person who asked me to ever ask me to read that poem. So
Oh,
thank you.
oh, you bet.
I, I
You bet.
really, I really feel it in my heart that he did give us our lives. And if we're readers, you and I are both readers, we know that the poets we love, they're forever, or the writers we love, they're forever giving us a bigger life. And that was my thought as a child. If we sent our work out into the world, if we shared with others our thoughts on the page, we might have a bigger life. And yeah, it's been true.
And what a great transition to you sharing with the
Ah,
world
my
this
friend.
beautiful book.
Yes. Well,
I
this
I
book,
told you by email that I was just gonna I was gonna poke around in it a little bit last night and just check it out before we met because I wanted to focus on your writing, but I did not put it down until I finished the entire book. It is just
I'm so happy.
it
You
is
you sent me the greatest email today. It was such a beautiful response to this book. And really, some people have written, some of my friends, my personal friends, have written who've never commented on anything I've written ever in their lives, maybe. They have written me like, this is a book I've read in years. I love this book by Anne Alejandro. And we have to bring up that it's published in your town where you are.
this is
So
true.
this is the Texas A&M University Press 50 years celebration catalog. And our book is on the first page, which made us so happy. So my
Yeah.
dear friend, the wonderful writer, teacher, critic, Marion Winnick, who lives in Baltimore, but she did live in Austin for 20 years. Marion and I were correspondents with this incredible, beautiful person, Anne Alejandro, who was born in and lived in Uvalde, Texas. And Anne was writing us these long letters for many, many years. For me, it was like more than 35 years. For Marion, it was a shorter time. And then at first, they were all handwritten letters in envelopes. Then they became typed. Then they went on to the computer. And so we had a lot of material saved to create this book from. Anne's story was she was a literary person from childhood. She loved the library. She loved school, loved reading. Her father was a farmer in Uvalde, and her mother was a teacher. And she had a sister and a brother. And she was just an avid writer. And I first met her when I was doing a teacher poetry workshop here in San Antonio for Region 20. So the Region 20 workshops would invite teachers from communities surrounding, and she came to one. And I had known her sister in college too, so that was a connection.
Yeah.
Anne was diagnosed at the age of 32 with chronic pain, fibromyalgia, and other mysterious physical problems that made her life difficult, very hard. Uh, it was brutal to feel her suffering, to love her, know what an outdoorsy person she was. I mean, Anne was never happier than when she was outdoors, except when she was reading. When she was outdoors, riding a horse, riding a mule, fishing, hunting, doing all the things on her family ranch next to Uvalde that she loved. So to be a person having so much pain recurrently from such a young age was very, very rough. And because of this circumstance in her own life, uh, she was never kind of having the capacity, the powers to get her work out in as many ways as she deserved to, because as you've just said, she was a heck of a writer. She was such a good writer. And I used to tell her, come on, let's send your work out. You could send it to this contest. You could send it to this magazine. You could do this. I was always kind of urging her forward.
What would be her response when you would urge her?
Well, her response would be, I know, I should do those things, but I just don't have the energy. I'm in such pain. I can't do it. She one time, on her own, I didn't have anything to do with this, entered a contest in North Carolina. It was a poetry chapbook contest, and she won. Um, People who had never read her letters or met her or heard her. She won the contest. A little book came out called Beauty Parlor Poems, which she wrote in the voice of people who are in a beauty parlor getting services. Many, many different voices filled that little magical book. But it was long out of print. And, I would say, Anne, here's a contest, enter it. And, uh, and she wouldn't. So at one point, I was creating a Texas anthology, which would go on to be called Is This Forever or What? Poems and Paintings from Texas. And that was a line, by the way, from a poem by Carrie Fountain of Austin. And I said to Anne, you've got to be in this book. I know you don't even consider yourself really a poet. She was a little bit more of a prose writer, but she was always a poet. She was both, as you can see.
Yeah.
So I said, Anne, you've got to let me, if you don't have the energy to do it, I'm going to ransack this picnic basket. Literally, I kept a picnic basket under my desk, a straw picnic basket for 30 years with pages from Anne in it. And once computers came into usage, I started printing up her letters. They were all in this basket. So I said, you have to let me, I'll edit something of yours and put it in the book. She said, okay, you can do that. So I did the thing you mentioned. I know about 1,000 things. And I edited that, and it appeared as I know a thing or two. That was a title that we
Spelled
all, yeah,
spelled Thinger, Thinger. I know a thing
she
or
had a
two.
great sense of humor, and
Yeah.
she really believed in writing in a colloquial vernacular many times too. So Anne's piece went into the book, and afterwards, all the reviews mentioned it. All the people who wrote me little fan notes from around Texas said, well, that piece by Anne Alejandro is my favorite thing in the book. And by the way, who the heck is she? They'd never heard of her. So originally, the subtitle of this book was going to be The Best Texas Writer Nobody Knew. And we changed that after the school massacre in Uvalde because we wanted Uvalde, Texas to be on the cover, because we wanted Uvalde to be proud of their beautiful daughter, Anne. And we also felt like that horrible tragedy is what people are going to associate with Uvalde for a very long time. And that's not fair because there's so much greatness and beauty about the whole community. Um, so we changed that, and then the press ended up putting the best Texas writer almost no one has ever heard of on the inside flap,
Yeah.
because people had heard of her. The people who had read her chapbook or had read, her work here or there in the few places it appeared, had heard of her. Marion and I worked hard to create this book. We had so much material to go through. But as Marion would describe it, it was an act of literary citizenship. As I would describe it, it was a labor of love because we loved her. Everybody who met her loved her and was changed by her. The photograph on the cover, by the way, is taken by my husband, Michael Nye, who interviewed her for a project that he did. And he gave us a little clip of her voice that we've been able to play because she had a very beautiful voice and Texas slant of voice that we like playing at our presentations about the book. But anyway, she mattered. She mattered not just to her family and her students. She was able to teach for some years at Southwest Texas Junior College there in Uvalde. She also taught weaving. She was a weaver, and she commuted into San Antonio to the Southwest School of Art to do that. Um, we just were so filled with passion for this book to come out. So the fact that it has come out, that it has received some really beautiful comments from people, and from people like you, John, makes us very happy. And Marion Winnick and I want to thank you. We did a little book tour in Texas. It was fantastic. We went to 5 communities in 5 days, and people were so warm to this book. And we're getting ready to do a little book tour in Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, which is interesting to us because it's not Texas. And so I'm sure people will be asking different questions, than they ask us when we're already in Texas. And I think Anne's book has some important work to do in the world. I feel like this book, as Marion said, in some ways, it represents all of the terrific writers out there who remain kind of outsider artists all their lives. Like Emily Dickinson, during her own lifetime, was an outsider artist. Her work was in her drawer. People we don't hear of during their lifetimes, but who are brilliant. A friend of mine who was a historian named Terrence O'Donnell in the state of Oregon. He was also a wonderful writer. He used to say there are so many great writers that we've never heard of,
that are not famous.
that are not famous,
Yeah.
whose work maybe it saw the light of day for a few years, and then we never heard of them again.
Yeah.
At the time that his book came out, the writer Madison Cooper of Waco, Texas, had written the longest novel in the English language. But you go to Waco today and you ask a general audience, how many of you know about Madison Cooper? Very few hands will go up. So many people are either forgotten too quickly or unknown too much or forever. And so we're very excited that Anne can be known through this volume. And as Marion will tell you, if you meet her or talk to her, she was the critic on the volume because I was picking out longer passages to use.
Yeah.
So she said Naomi was the lover of Anne's work, and I was the critic. I was the cutter down of the text. She felt that the book might serve people's appetites in a different way if it had smaller increments. And also, we were dealing with so much writing that Marion kept saying, let's make this palatable and pick upable. She wanted it to be like a slim gift book. And I just hope people will find I Know About 1,000 Things, the writings of Anne Alejandro of Uvalde, Texas, and fall in love with it as you and I have.
Absolutely. And why don't we, I want to respect your time and it coming up on time here. So why don't we take this thing out by reading? I'd love to read a little bit, and I want to know what you would like to read.
Hear your voice read, John, and I would love to read something toward the beginning of the book, and then something that we put at the very end of the book. How about that? Okay. So you read first.
Oh, okay. I'll read first. So I think you probably know what I want to read because I sent it to you last night. There's a couple of things here that, my God, this was my favorite, I think, about heaven. Hugs to everybody who can bear it. I can stand by a solid, steady hug way more than the vaporous love and light people send so often. In fact, if, as I am dying, anyone says or telepathizes me to go to the light, I am going to say, fuck you. I'm not going anywhere there's not a mule. Or I'll choose the place with the juke joint, pulled pork sandwiches, and ice cold IBC root beer in brown bottles. Wow.
That's funny. Anne was funny.
She loved her mule, yes.
She loved her mule. She loved donkeys. She loved horses, dogs, you name it. So here's one for you from the chapter. We did locate the different sections in little chapters with titles like land, faith, pain, things like that. So this is from Land. In March, the bluebonnets will be glorious. So you must come. But in snake boots, because they emerge furious and snapping in teeming hordes from dens on exactly March 6th. We can roast marshmallows and listen to the multitudinous band of coyotes, and we will have no armor. We will await the purpose of the day. And though we nearly miss it, the purpose of all days is watch, listen, learn. I mean, that was her spirit. She was open to the days.
And
And go ahead.
and someone who dealt with such chronic pain kept such an open heart and such a great attitude. This one right here, I failed the trial by fire, and I refuse to believe God wants me to suffer because he loves me. He loves me, and I suffer. One doesn't follow. It is the swallow's broken wing. It is the petal crushed by the broken limb. The owl intends the mouse no harm.
Wow.
I,
It gives me goosebumps to hear you
yes,
read her words.
yes,
She
yes,
was a person, by the way, of great faith. And I mean, she could curse a little bit. There are a few curse words in this book, not that
yeah,
many.
yeah,
But she had a devotion to her God, to the world, to humans, to humanity. Um, she was so funny. And, you know, the fact that she kept writing through this pain too, up to the very end of her life. I mean, writing was an act that I think helped keep her steady as she lost her capacities to do other things. Um, Thank you for reading that. I love hearing it in your voice. So she was madly in love with uh, her mule, and her mule's name was Chess Pie. And so I will read this last section. We loved it so much at the end. We put it at the very end of the book. And I do want to thank her family, the Alejandro and Toombs families, both, because they have been real champions of wanting this book to happen and to have some of them stand up at different events, her husband in Uvalde, her granddaughter in Austin, and have them speak, her cousin in San Marcos, have them speak to who she was to them, her magic, her incredible self has been really, really touching to us. So here's the very closing of the book from N. Alejandro. Chess Pie and I go to a world without words. At sunset, there is a rounding road on a hill from which we can see not a sign of any human at all, only the bowl of sky equal to the earth around us. We can see southwest to the clouds forming on the Gulf of Mexico that will bring us the wind in the evening. We look north and we can see the Uvalde water towers, Mount Inge, the hills at Canipa, and the hills of all three rivers which spill into the valleys, the Nueces, the Frio, and the Sabinal. Every sunset, every flower or field of flowers, every cactus, every river and drought, with 117 degrees going on for days straight. It will be part of me. All the names of all the plants and trees and grasses I will know like my own. On summer evening breezes, I will smell the Gulf surf 200 miles away. Someday I will be almost whole.
Mm. Okay, folks, go order this book. You will not be sorry. Naomi, Shihab, and I thank you so much for doing this. You've been very patient with me, with our correspondence, and generous with your time. Thank you so much for taking the time to connect.
Thank you, John. It's been an honor, and I hope I get to meet you in your town one of these days.
I hope so too. Take care.
So much. Bye.
Bye bye.